Spiral from the Book of Saw is the latest movie in the Saw franchise and is finally coming to us after a year. This movie was supposed to come out in 2020, but then due to the pandemic, it's been pushed back by I think a year actually. And now we're finally getting a chance to see it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are excited to talk about it. I'm not going to go too much into the plot synopsis, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but essentially we follow two detectives led by Chris Rock who are trying to solve a series of murders that are taking place that seem to follow the pattern of the Jigsaw Killer very, very closely. But it also has a few twists and turns of its own, and now we have a new Saw movie. When it comes to the Saw movies, I like the first one, the second one was fine, but after a while, the sequels for me, they sort of became very repetitive. It became sort of like same shit, different day, and I was hoping that things would eventually switch up. Something very interesting could be done with the idea of a serial killer, quite like Jigsaw. Jigsaw, the movie that came out a few years ago, tried to do that a little bit and it tried to make some changes. The movie was fine as a whole, but it started to go down that road. Spiral drives into that skid a little bit more and does have a much more unique way of telling this story. It has a much more unique way of executing this thing. That being said, it doesn't always do it in the best way. I found Spiral to be kind of a mixed bag. I liked it a lot more than I expected to because, like I said, when it came to this franchise, the past few movies, they weren't exactly my cup of tea. And like I said, I wanted them to switch things up a bit. I appreciate that they really made an effort over here. And they tried to do some very interesting things along the way to make some of those choices feel even more unique as the film progressed. First of all, right out the gate, we gotta talk about the one major thing that a lot of people are going to be discussing, which is Chris Rock. Chris Rock is, of course, a very famous comedian, and people know him for comedy. Him in a dramatic role is interesting. And it's also very interesting because the idea for this film essentially came from him. And so you can see a lot of that in this movie. Like, at points, you can tell that this really feels like his baby. So I feel like all eyes are going to be on him, and I think he's really good in the movie. I think he does a fantastic job. I do think that his character could have been a little more fleshed out. We'll talk more about characterization in a little bit. That's a whole other subject in itself. But I think as far as dramatic roles go, and once again, I push this forward, but a lot of comedic actors, when you see them in more dramatic roles, I've seen them do a lot better than they do some of their comedy works. I'm not necessarily saying that's the case here, but it's great to see him in this, and he does a pretty good job. Everybody really here is good. Samuel L. Jackson is also in this movie, and he's in it for about as much as you'd think he's gonna be in it. I'll put it that way. Like if you saw the trailers and if you have some idea on how much screen time he could potentially have in it, that's about as much screen time as he has in it. So there you go. But he's also good in the movie. The movie's also pretty well shot. There's some very interesting direction, and and it's got a very high production value. It definitely doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel like something that was made in terms of just cranking out another sequel. It really feels like there was some love involved here, that they were trying to make something very, very good and trying to make something really stick. And I do appreciate that. And you can really tell that the effort and the talent that has gone into making this movie is to be praised. It is a very competently made movie. And the kills that are there in it, they're gory. There's some pretty vicious kills in I mean, it's not like you'll turn off the movie per se or anything like that, or maybe you could, but there's a few moments which are like definitely tense you up a little bit. So the movie does succeed on that front too, while painting it more as a thriller that you're essentially following two detectives on, very similar to stuff like Seven, or in some a couple of episodes at some point even Mindhunter. When you're following stuff like that, there's potential to do a lot of great stuff when it comes to characters, to really develop relationships and to really develop how these characters are progressing as the story progresses, for lack of better words. This is where the film starts to falter a bit for me, because characterization is not its strong suit. We get a lot of scenes of flashbacks with Chris Rock, flashbacks in Saw, sure, but there are certain points where the flashbacks, they don't quite match up in terms of how the story is being told. We're also seeing a lot of flashbacks that are being done in a way that seem to break perspective. For example, let's say that if I was sitting here right now, I could have a flashback to something and I leave the room. Okay, now something else happens in this room at the same time as I'm gone. I can't remember that obviously because I left the room, right? There's scenes like that in this movie. Like Chris Rock will be there, he'll leave the room, and then the scene continues on with the characters that are, potential that are already standing there. But you weren't there, Like so how would you know what was happening like verbatim, or like you know what you heard, or you know how the characters were responding and how they were, more physically responding to one another. That's something that doesn't quite make sense. It's in this movie, and I feel like it's gonna be like dwelled on quite a bit. It is kind of a flaw because these are crucial details that he's not there for, but he somehow knows. At least that's how it's implied. It just didn't quite add up for me. Actually, the editing in this movie at points was a little shaky for me, particularly when it came to some of the horror sequences. You know, that fast editing sometimes? That's there in this movie. I thought we were over this many, many years ago. In fact, a couple of days ago, I was watching a movie which was released in 2011, which had that very high frame rate editing. And I remember reviews that time condemning that, like, oh god, it's so annoying. It's like really like messes with how you're trying to watch a film. It's very irritating. And now it's 2021, 10 years later, and I saw that editing in this movie, and I'm like, why? Why is it there? Just let your shots go normally. You don't have to do high speed editing anymore. It's not like you need to keep our interest. The movie is well paced as is at 93 minutes or so. It really keeps your attention. So you don't need to do all kinds of crazy editing tricks to keep me, from taking my eyes off the screen. It's not gonna happen. But I want to get back to characterization for a moment because, like, aside from the flashback stuff, we don't really get to know much about who we are seeing in this movie and how, when things are happening to them, it sometimes makes us care less about what's going on, which I found to be a very missed opportunity because, like, in a couple of kills, for instance, there's some emotional attachments and there is actually history behind these characters, especially when it relates to Zeke, our main character. But we don't often feel that. In particular, one death really affects Zeke quite a bit, and you're supposed to have a very, powerful moment of empathy for him. Like there, it's like, oh my god, that I understand where you're coming from, but it doesn't quite land because we don't really have that kind of learning about this particular person that has happened. This horrible thing has happened to. So I think that over there was a missed opportunity. I find myself coming back to the same things when it comes to the movie's flaws, really, because those are really what constitute it for me. It's why when in the beginning I said Spiral drives into the skid a little bit more of trying to do something different, I wish it sort of, steered into it completely instead of like taking a slight turn right, if you know what I mean. Like, it feels like it's sort of testing the waters instead of really trying to, realize its full potential. And it leads to some mistakes because of that. I wish it sort of became even more into, like, it sort of like delved more into that idea that Chris Rock brought to it. And it was able to do some stuff which was even more unique. I wish that was the case. Unfortunately, it leads to a movie that's fine. You can watch it, you can enjoy it. I think if you're a fan of the franchise, you might think this is one of the better movies, and I do. I know I feel like I'm railing on it, but in honesty, I do like it more than most of the Saw sequels, so make of that what you will. Although, I also found myself thinking that if you're somebody who's never seen a Saw movie, you could have some fun with this. Like, it doesn't require you to having seen everything. Of course, it enriches your experience if you have seen the other Saw movies, but if you're somebody who is a new entrant into the franchise, you might still have a ball with this one. I'm gonna give Spiral from the Book of Saw a 7 out of 10. It's out in theaters tomorrow. Give it a watch. Let me know what you guys think about it. Thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more reviews very soon. I'm also reviewing Those Who Wish Me Dead this weekend, as well as hopefully Army of the Dead. So there's a lot to talk about. And as always, if you like this, guys, please do subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the movies.